Welcome to Super Context, a podcast autopsy of media.
How we consume it and how it informs our everyday culture.
I'm Christian Sager, a writer and a designer.
And I'm Charlie Bennett, a librarian and a radio raconteur.
Each episode is us trying to understand the entertainment world that we all live in.
Just a little bit better. Today's episode is about the 1993 essay, The Problem with Music. 33 years ago, our late lamented hero, Steve Albini, wrote a gross and profane takedown of the music industry. And we've been thinking about it ever since. We try to follow the evolution of Albini's attitude about how music is distributed, while also checking in on David Byrne, Marxist theory, and Tik Tok.
You can find show notes for this episode on Patreon at patreon.com/supercontext, or you can write us an email at supercontextpodcast@gmail.com. Tell us what you think. Do we live in a nation of grifters out to exploit all of us? Or is it the same as it ever was?
My God, what have I done? He is a conundrum. Steve Albini, who is the instigator of today's episode, is a conundrum because he was, before the internet, he was an edgelord, which is a term that we use now for people who try to attack the world with snark and irony and get a rise out of everyone. And he presented a very angry face, and his music was very confrontational. But there's also just a litany of compliments and appreciations about him by the people who worked with him. People loved him and felt that he loved them back. And he had a reputation for a certain kind of whimsy and kindness and light kittens. And he started that charity project, the Letters to Santa or From Santa, all this stuff. And yet there's also some people who think he was a piece of shit and always was, you know.
Well, I think we would be remiss if we didn't remind the audience that we, maybe our second episode, did an episode about Steve Albini and his edgelordism.
I think it's third.
Which was before we even really had a format for the show. And I have not gone back and listened to it, but I think the premise of the episode was us examining the fact that the shellac song You Came in Me was sort of a pivotal moment for Steve Albini to publicly put the edgelord persona behind him and to stand up against other edgelords, which was something he did pretty frequently on social media before he died. I'm going to say this again. I did not know him. I only engaged with him in a parasocial relationship. You actually interacted with him.
I had a 1 hour-long conversation with him in a journalistic sense. And so I didn't know him, but I got the vibe of the man.
Yeah. But my impression always was this Steve Albini, late 80s, early 90s Steve Albini, the only way people like you and I could interact with him, even in a parasocial way, was either through essays like we're about to talk about, or through albums and the lyrics on the albums, or the things he said in between songs live. That was about it.
Yeah.
And those were performance places, and that's where he was performing that persona. I have since sort of thought, and again, I don't know shit, but like that he was genuinely like a kind person. Even back then, I think, amongst his friends and his community. And he was a prankster, and I'm sure he could be difficult, but like he's beloved by the people who really knew him.
He is beloved. That's kind of.
And I think too, Charlie, like when we got into the 2000s and the 2010s and social media, again, this is the same point where he sort of revised his public persona.
Yeah.
But also he was on social media and you got to see a little bit more of the like, oh, this is who he actually is. He's not always performing on here. He was also interviewed on podcasts a lot, like your own. He was in YouTube videos. He was on one of those Anthony Bourdain shows. And it gave you an opportunity to sort of get a measure of who he actually was beyond like the performance persona.
He also literally grew up in the sense that the first records he made them, in his bedroom or whatever, in a practice space. And he was doing what he could, and he was very punk rock, and he didn't have responsibilities. He could just be kind of like this force of nature. But then by the time that he had really established his recording studio, he had employees and a business, and he had to make the money to keep it going. And he
Hmm.
had a wife or a partner. I think they were married, but
I
he had a
think that's right.
partner,
Yeah. Yeah.
and like he had to manage the adult things that arrive that you don't know about. You and I had recently a long conversation about venting pipes for tankless water heaters.
Yeah, right. And what begat that conversation about venting pipes was a conversation about dealing with surcharges from rental companies.
That's right.
So this is like, us in our late 40s, early 50s, uh, interacting with the real world of late stage capitalism. Um, I,
Can we call it the fake world
yeah,
of
I
late
think it
stage
is.
capitalism?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to plant a flag or two before we go on. The first is, I don't think this is going to be like a normal super context episode because there are things about this piece of media we're going to talk about that don't hit the same beats that we normally do. The other is that you and I are unabashed fans of Albini's. Um, I think we're both pretty much in the tank for him. I think we probably were 10 years ago when we recorded that episode.
For sure.
Um, and yeah, I think that we're not super capable of being objective here.
Yes. And so let me join you with one of those flags. This episode will be a nostalgia engine in a lot of ways. It's going to allow us to reflect on ourselves and our mental and creative conditions at the time that the article came out. We will be surveying or reviewing our relationship with Steve Albini as an artist.
Hmm.
And probably we will be reckoning with some of the stuff that we had to give up or let go of in order to be adults in the fake world of late stage capitalism.
Yeah, I want to put another flag down and then let's explain who he is in case there are people listening who are
And
like,
then
I
we
don't
can
know what
burn all
this
the
is.
flags.
Um, you said that he grew up, and I'm sure that's true. But at the same time, when you read the essay that we're going to talk about today, The Problem with Music, this is 93. I would guess at the oldest, he was late 20s, early 30s when he wrote this.
I think he's about 10 years older than me.
Okay.
So I think he
Yeah.
was 30-ish at this
Yeah.
moment.
So, this is an essay where he is describing the fantasy of being a successful musician versus the reality of surviving in the world as a musician. So
Yeah.
even then, he was keenly aware of, the realities of paying your bills or having health insurance or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Steve Albini, the late Steve Albini, was a Chicago-based American musician, engineer, and he was a defender, Chris.
Yeah. He was a defender of fun.
He played music in Big Black and Shellac, and also a number of other projects whose names I would prefer not to say on the podcast.
Yeah.
He was confrontational and he felt completely comfortable using slurs and misogynistic language, racial slurs and misogynistic language, because um, he felt objectively and obviously anti-racist and feminist and progressive, so that it would be clear if he used this language that he was using it ironically.
And I think we should clarify too, again, like this is weirdly based on this episode we did 10 years ago, but I think the Steve Albini that wrote this essay was like that. I
Yes,
don't think the
yeah.
Steve Albini in his 50s was like that. And
Well,
he
no,
was
he
pretty
reflected on
adamantly
it.
against it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
he reflected on it and said, "This is what I thought." But I am
Hmm.
saying that the bands that between Big Black and
Yes.
Shellac that he had that had names that were confrontational, like names that as I said, I won't even say on the podcast. And he did that with that kind of, you all know that I'm not like that, so it's okay for me to do
Right.
this in order to get the rise. He would say things like, people who would be offended by this, him using the N word in a song or in a band name, they're part of the problem because they're too big an idiot to not recognize that they shouldn't be offended,
Mm.
et cetera, et
Hmm.
cetera.
Hmm.
I think that that's an indefensible position.
I think, yeah, and I think he realized that
Yeah.
over time. Um, I think I told this story on our previous episode, but since it's been so long, I can't remember. One of the legends I always heard about him, which I have no idea if this is true or if this is just urban myth that punks pass down to one another, was that when he was in college, one of his art projects
God,
was that
right.
he built like a glass cube and he sat in it in the middle of campus and just yelled epithets at
Yeah.
people walking by. And the art project was like they couldn't get to him inside this cube, but they would like yell at him, they'd pound on the cube, they'd throw things at him, and that was the performance.
And there's a lot of metaphor to pull there. Like he felt like it could be a real story, it could be not a real story, but he felt comfortable doing that in this story because he couldn't be attacked, he couldn't be reached. He could see
Yeah.
the reactions, but the reaction couldn't actually harm him. And so everything
It's
was
white
like
privilege. It's
divorced from
literally,
consequence. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Um, there's plenty of this to talk about. Let me
Yeah.
finish our mini bio. He played guitar and sang in bands, but he also, by the end of his life, he had been the recording engineer on, when I spoke to him, he said thousands. I have no
Oh, yeah.
idea. Thousands of records, many of which no one's ever heard, and some of which everyone's heard. Like he engineered Nirvana's In Utero, PJ Harvey's Rid of Me, the Pixies' Surfer Rosa, also Bush and Cheap Trick and Robert Plant and Jimmy
And yeah,
Page
Led
is
Zeppelin.
Road to, no, not Zep. Hey,
Well,
hey,
but
easy
you
there, Tiger.
because those two guys aren't in it. It's not them.
I think it's Road to Clarksdale is the name of that record.
Oh yeah, yeah,
And he was the owner operator of Electrical Audio in Chicago, which was a recording studio. I think three main recording rooms, apartments. Like people would come and record an album
I
in the
believe
studio.
it still is, right? It
Oh
hasn't
yeah, yeah.
closed
But
down.
but
Yeah,
when he died, he was the owner
yeah,
operator. It is now owned and operated by the staff.
yeah, yeah,
He died in 2024, right before the last Shellac record came out, To All Trains.
yeah.
Died of a heart attack at the age of 61. I'm gonna, I think.
I think that's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. I think it's safe to say you and I were both devastated.
Knocked down.
That was a
Yeah.
hard month. That was a hard month for me. Um,
We had
in
seen
general.
them.
And then the Steve Albini thing happened, and I was like, oh, there goes like one of my role
Yeah.
models. Yeah.
You and I saw Shellac in Atlanta at the Mammal Gallery. Um, sometime between starting Super Context and um,
No, I think it was after, wasn't it? No?
no, no, between the start of Super Context
Oh,
and now.
okay.
I can't remember.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
want to say it was like 2016, maybe.
yeah. But I that was an amazing show.
Yeah, it was
Um,
great.
we ought not get too wrapped up in the memories, but yeah, huge part of our lives. Now,
So we're here to talk about an essay not music, that
None of the
he
records,
didn't play music on this or record it.
none of our
This is
personal
an
experiences with him.
this is an essay that he wrote called "The Problem with Music." I believe it was published in 1993 by the Baffler.
Yep,
I
a
think it was
magazine
in
called The
an
Baffler.
issue of the Baffler. I first read it in Commodify Your Dissent, which is a collection of Baffler essays um,
Do you know where I first read it?
on the internet.
On the internet,
Yeah.
on a complete, almost unformatted web page, black background, green text.
Yeah.
It was
Like
it.
GeoCities. Yeah.
This memory is crazy. Like,
Yeah.
um, and it was around the time that uh, Terraform came out,
Yeah.
so it was pretty close after the publication.
So yeah, we're talking, I think Terraformer came out in like what, 95, 96, something
Yeah,
like that.
something like
Yeah.
that. Okay. This essay, The Problem with Music, is sometimes called Some of Your Friends Are Already This Fucked.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's about a few things. This is me. This is
Yeah.
me summarizing this. I read through it again. I think it is about the perils of signing contracts with major labels. It is about distinctly, this is something that he argued about his whole life, even after this, the difference between being an engineer and a producer, the requirements to be a good engineer, and then ultimately the sustainability of the music industry for career musicians. Um, he basically runs through the numbers like real time, and this is 1993 numbers, to prove that bands get screwed financially on major label deals while the record company still makes a profit. This is a quote from the essay. The band members have each earned about one third as much as they would have if they worked at a 7-Eleven, but they got to ride in a tour bus for a month.
Every time I thought about this episode building up to it, a phrase popped in my head, which is, "Hey, Chris, remember when web blogs were on paper? Like, this is,
You mean zines?
yeah,
I mean, the
you know,
Baffler was essentially a zine at this time.
this is what, this is like the model for those amazing blogs, excuse me, that people wrote in the early 2000s.
Like Mark Fisher.
Yeah, that were deeply personal, if not antagonistic, then aggressive and unflinching
Yeah,
explorations of ideas that did not have to match a house style or really
right.
be vetted in any way. I'm sure
I,
the Baffler edited and made sure that the article worked, but it's not like he had
sure.
to pass the I don't know. I don't know what I'm trying to say beyond clearly this was Albini's voice unvarnished.
Yes. Yeah, very much so. Um, I was about to say this, and then I noticed that the next note says exactly what I was about to say. This is from the Free Press Houston, who wrote about this essay in 2018. They said, bear in mind,
No, actually, I dropped this in here and I'm sorry to surprise you. This is a direct quote from Steve Albini in
oh,
a interview. So
oh, sorry.
he says to them when they say, "Hey, you wrote this essay, The Problem with Music." He says,
Bear in mind, the problem with music was written 25 plus years ago, so it was a kind of warning to my peers in the music scene about the state of the professional music industry at the time. Things have changed a lot. The professional music industry has winnowed down to a very small, hard core of extremely efficient businessmen. And when I say efficient, I mean efficient in extracting value from the relationship between the artist and the artist's audience.
okay, pause right there. So he said it was a warning to my friends in the music scene. And then he starts describing capitalism
Yeah,
very specifically. Like
yeah.
the phrase extracting value. If you are not familiar with capitalist critique or critiques of capitalism, that's an explicit call out to this is where free market is corrupted by
Mm,
capitalism.
yeah. Um, Yeah, the way I was going to phrase it before I saw this quote is that people who are younger may be wondering what the fuss is all about. But the music industry was a very different place in the early 90s than it is now, or even than it was 15 years ago. And I think it's hard to sort of understand that unless you were in that ecosystem. And like when I say ecosystem, like you and I weren't um, putting out records or running record labels, but we were reading things like this or going to shows and sort of breathing the air. And you had an understanding. There was sort of an understanding of like, there's two paths, right? There's this path that he's warning against, and then there's the path that he took, which at the time was a lot harder than it is now. And he says that here in this quote from 2018. The music business is not a boogeyman to me at this stage. It's no longer a threat to my peers. My friends and peers can operate their entire careers successfully outside of the conventional music business. That is a fantastic development. So, having said that, I felt this was an important thing to write at the time.
So the warning was, in essence, if you think that getting signed by a major music label is winning the lottery or solving all your problems or the thing that you should be trying to do, let me make an argument to you that the finances say no,
Right.
that you will be exploited. And you'll be exploited in a way, going back to that 7-Eleven quote, you'll be exploited in a way that feels kind of cool. You'll get to ride on a tour bus. You'll make records. You
Yeah.
won't have to pay for anything, including the party at the end of making the record, although you'll be charged for that later. And uh, the thing about the producer and engineer that he so carefully and angrily lays out comes from him saying what you'll be charged for as a band. The record company will charge you for hiring a producer, and
Yeah.
the producer will come in and you'll be amazed, and it'll be someone who, quote unquote, produced another record that you think is fantastic. But for him, a real producer, I'm not gonna lay out exactly what he says, but a real producer can play all the instruments that are on a record that they're
Mm.
producing and others. They understand how recording works as a technical endeavor and as a kind of aesthetic endeavor. They
Yeah.
can write music. They can understand what the music is that they're listening to. They are not a person who fiddles with the knobs and says, "Yeah, that's kind of cool. Why don't you do another take?"
And he's very specific about like at a bare minimum, they should know this brand of microphone and what it does and how it can record sounds in a room. Like
Yeah.
he's very specific. There are a couple people he calls out as being bullshit producers, and I'm not saying this to lead into it. I can't remember who they are, but they're pretty famous people. One of them is that guy from the band Gumball, uh, Don Fleming.
Yeah.
He calls
And
that
Jerry
guy out.
Harrison from Talking Heads.
Oh, okay, yeah,
And
yeah,
it's very much him saying, just because you know musicians and you can sit in a room
yeah.
and be like, yeah, I'm getting it, doesn't make you a producer. Now, I set all that up to then get us to this introduction because if you if you don't know this article we're talking about, if you don't know Albini's deal, here's how he starts his article about the economics of the music business. Whenever I talk to a band who are about to sign with a major label, I always end up thinking of them in a particular context. I imagine a trench about 4 feet wide and 5 feet deep, maybe 60 yards long, filled with runny, decaying shit. I imagine these people, some of them good friends, some of them barely acquaintances, at one end of this trench. I also imagine a faceless industry lackey at the other end, holding a fountain pen and a contract waiting to be signed. Nobody can see what's printed on the contract. It's too far away, and besides, the shit stench is making everybody's eyes water. The lackey shouts to everybody that the first one to swim the trench gets to sign the contract. Everybody dives in the trench and they struggle furiously to get to the other end. Two people arrive simultaneously and begin wrestling furiously, clawing each other and dunking each other under the shit. Eventually, one of them capitulates. There's only one contestant left. He reaches for the pen, but the lackey says, "Actually, I think you need a little more development. Swim it again, please, backstroke." And he does, of course.
So this struck me not only because I think it's a fantastic way, without us reading the whole essay, to uh, give the audience a taste of what this article is
Let's not
like.
use the word taste at this moment.
But the other thing that I was really struck by is that a couple months ago we did an episode about the Magic Christian. And this, the way he's describing this, the metaphor he's using, is literally the end metaphor of the movie The Magic Christian, of everybody climbing into a giant vat of shit, blood, and piss so they can get money.
Yeah. And what's the difference here is that in this metaphor, these people are not jumping in to grab money. They're jumping in at the behest of someone to
Yeah.
make them money. And so he feels like it's
Hmm.
even worse.
Well, but they're being told they'll make money, that there's prestige and money for them if they do it the right way. But his argument throughout the piece is, but actually, no, there's no money for you. And you're going to come out of this worse than you were before.
Yeah. Okay. So this was written in 1993, and we've pretty well established Albini, but he had just started the band Shellac, sometimes Shellac of North America. His reputation as an engineer was pretty solid. He'd worked with Fugazi, Jesus Lizard, John Spencer Blues Explosion, Failure, Don Caballero, PJ Harvey, and Jawbreaker.
That was all.
Um,
I put those all down because I looked at the discography. That was this year. This
yeah.
was 93, the same year that he wrote this.
And In Utero was coming.
Yeah. I think he recorded it in 93. And I think, if I remember, it came out in 94.
And if you hear me reading the start of this article, it's quite clear. This is the confrontational, quote unquote, edge lord, Steve Albini. You
Yeah.
know, it seems unlikely that every time he talked to a band that was saying, yeah, we're talking to a label, that he immediately imagined the trench of shit. But
Hmm.
that's how he's going to get his thoughts across. We talked about the Baffler. This was is and was an American magazine of culture and politics. You said it was kind of a zine at the time that Albini was doing it.
I
It
mean, it was like a high production zine. It wasn't like
Yeah,
Xeroxed, but it was. Um, I always thought of it as like Thomas Frank was pulling together this group of really smart intellectuals that were also counterculture people and asking them to write essays like this.
yeah.
Um,
It was the source of certainly the collection you described. Commodify your dissent, salvos from the Baffler. So that's the you know that's how they describe themselves, or that's how they position themselves in dissent, in confrontation to mainstream.
and you mentioned this, they're still around today. I highly recommend. I don't know that they publish in print as much anymore, but it's a blog still, and it's still great. Yeah.
So, what do you remember about when you first read it? Because here's where we really start to go away from what a normal super context episode has been like.
Hmm.
That's the production that we have to discuss about the article. Albini wrote
Hmm.
it as a warning to his friends. He was publishing things at the time. He wrote music criticism and some other essays. Uh, it We're not going to get deep into what the Baffler was doing publication wise. We're going to
Hmm.
talk about this article and kind of its super context, what it means now, and the kind of
Yeah.
journey that these ideas have taken. So, what did you think when you first read it?
Well, I probably read it in 99 because I'm pretty sure that I bought it from Wordsworth Books in Cambridge, Massachusetts when I first moved here. Um,
So pretentious, Chris. How dare you?
and I I um I remember reading it and I remember just I don't think I understood it to the degree that I understand it now, but I remember reading it and thinking, yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Because at that point, I had been playing in bands for 5 years, and I had been playing with other punk rock bands and been a part of that culture. And this was just sort of the general conversation in those spaces, you know? Um, but also, I was I was young, but I was also hungry for this kind of thing because um, this kind of intellectualism was not common in punk rock spaces. Um, and yeah, I was looking for more of it. And so like places like the Baffler or Punk Planet magazine, sometimes in Heart Attack magazine, I would find essays like this and I would just like consume them voraciously.
Yeah. When I read it, I was not in the headspace I am in now when it comes to um, industry, capitalism, art, music.
Yeah.
I my
You
high
were
s-
like full on into grunge at this time.
I was getting there, yeah.
Yeah.
See my path to grunge is through Neil Young and Jimi Hendrix. Because when I was in high school, and if you are a longtime listener to Super Context, you've heard me say this so many times. But when I was in high school, I didn't want to listen to the pop music or the sort of dance pop music. And I found classic rock, and that was where I went. Classic rock station, DC. I was not DC 101. Oh my gosh. I've forgotten the name of the classic rock station when I was growing up. It just jumped out of my head. But I was listening to classic rock, which at the time was, stuff from 15 years before. And
Right. Isn't that wild? Like when you think about it
yeah,
now.
but Zeppelin, Neil Young, Creedence Clearwater Revival, all that kind of stuff, uh, which these days is just kind of like so. A person who only listens to that right now is a person who's cutting themselves off from everything good that's happening right now, you know? Uh,
Sure. Yeah, I guess. I don't know. I have a weird different perspective on this. Because you know this, but I spent like a lot of time with my aunt and uncle
yeah,
recently,
yeah.
and they are not like attuned to any kind of like music subculture. Their access to music is mostly through like American Idol. And I was watching American Idol with them and just kind of like, what is this? Like, this is not,
Yeah, that's
what
not
I'm
for you,
interested in.
Chris.
But like on shows like that, the singers do covers of the bands that you just mentioned, you know?
They do covers of them, yeah, but
Yeah.
but they don't listen to just those original records, you know.
No, 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 no.
So I was in a position of I was starting to get into grunge through its connection to classic rock, but I was also struggling with no one wanted to listen to what I was listening to. Like we talked about King's X before we
Yeah.
got on air. Everybody hated them and thought I was silly for listening to them. Um, and so I was struggling with how music taste uh, was being perceived by me and everybody else as like this key moral element to your character.
Mm.
So, yeah, if someone came and said, "Hey, listen to this shellac record," I'd be like, "It's kind of good," but it would be um, packaged with a sort of, "So stop listening to that square shit. Stop listening to that
Uh,
stuff that is kind
yeah.
of old and useless."
Which is
And
that's where the bummer is,
yeah,
right? Is that
totally.
like because there was so much gatekeeping. And I think that is maybe a difference between our generation and younger generations. I don't see the gatekeeping as much.
Oh, I
Um,
don't think there's any really.
yeah, and it's like it's totally okay to both like shellac and Credence.
Yeah, and in fact, that is a remarkably appropriate pairing. So I misunderstood this essay the first time I read it. I thought or I felt that he was saying major label music is bad. See how they make it. You shouldn't listen to it.
Oh,
But that's not in there.
not at all.
It's
No, in
just what
fact,
I
he
took
has
from it.
not only he has plenty of friends who have made music for major labels, but he has recorded their music for major
Yeah,
labels.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it took me a while to click into what he was actually talking about. And in a lot of ways, it is the post-internet, post-Napster internet distribution of music
Mm,
that makes it clear what Albini was really trying to say. Don't be suckered or seduced by the music industry offering you access or offering you distribution, and all of these perks and everything, because they're going to make money off of you and
mm.
all the things you feel like, hey, we're rock stars, look at that, you're paying for. It's out of your advance, it's out of your royalties, and the way they will extract value from the work you do as a band is not worth um, the damage it does to you. The way that they extract value takes so much more from you than what they give you, which is access to an audience.
Yeah.
And once the internet
Exposure.
exposure, once the internet allowed you to access your audience, well, this is what he said in 2013 in a Quartz interview. The single best thing that has happened in my lifetime in music after punk rock is being able to share music globally for free. That's such an incredible development.
So let's put a pin in this for a second because this episode originally was just going to be about the problem with music. And then when I was doing the research, I was unaware of this, even though we're self-professed Steve Albini fans. This 2013 Quartz interview is actually sort of the sequel to
Yeah,
the problem with music, where he plants another flag and he says, actually, it's been almost 20 years, and um, the file sharing, being able to share music, because this is 2013. Spotify was probably around for a couple of years by that point, but I don't think it was the monster it is now. But like he saw that as being a game changer.
yeah. And the problem with music is kind of victim of its own um, excess in imagery and personality. Um, those concepts like uh, people trying to get a major label deal are swimming in a trench of shit.
Hmm.
Uh, Producers are bullshit unless they're the classic old kind of producers, and there aren't any of those. You're all recording engineers, and you need to be better at it. Look at how the money goes. All of those things sort of each kind of separately have a kind of power
Hmm.
to grab the mind and make people pay attention. Like, oh yeah, he's so angry at major labels, he hates them. This is the whole like he hates digital. It's like
Yeah.
this is where I get to pretend I'm cool. Albini said to me directly, I don't have a problem with digital. I don't have a problem with uh, stuff that's recorded digitally. I don't do it that way. I record analog. That's what I want to do. I don't care about CDs. I don't care about MP3s beyond. That's not what I want to do my work with.
Well, but also, I mean, I don't want to put words in the dead man's mouth, but he recorded analog. He recorded as high quality as possible, and he made sure that his music was put out in a format that was available for people to get that high quality if they wanted it. At the same time, his band still puts out music on streaming platforms
Yeah.
where it's compressed and you cannot hear the quality of the recording the way it was intended.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that he's against it.
Right. It wasn't like hate and I want to destroy digital.
Yeah.
And certainly he was like, I don't want music labels or the music industry to do this to us. But he wasn't saying because the music industry exists, it makes a mockery of music and the music that's made that way. He was like,
Yeah.
this is a bad way for music to be distributed.
Hmm.
As he said in 2013, record labels which used to have complete control are essentially irrelevant. The process of a band exposing itself to the world is extremely democratic, and there are no barriers. Music is no longer a commodity, it's an environment or atmospheric element. Consumers have much more choice, and you see people indulging in the specificity of their tastes dramatically more. They only bother with music they like. And so that's the thing that he had been waiting for, the thing that he had been hoping for.
Yeah. Um, I think some folks are probably listening to this and like me, when I first read this, are pausing and going, wait a minute, that doesn't line up with what I know about how this is working. And so I do want to put a pin in that, and that like I think he's right in 2013, and I think he's right to be excited. At the same time, there are still gatekeepers in those spaces, and it is not entirely democratic, and there are barriers.
Yeah, and this is where you can defend Albini by saying, he's optimistically an edgelord. Like he's going too far in terms of how great everything is.
Hmm.
But I think what we're seeing in this interview, um, he says people can make music in their garage and reach their audiences through YouTube, Bandcamp, and any number of internet avenues. You can literally have a worldwide audience for your music with no corporate participation, which is tremendous. This is less of a accurate representation. Like, it's not journalism for music so much as it's him celebrating what he feels like is the end of the problem with music.
Right. Yeah, I think that's true. The problems that he saw are they're not solved by the distribution of music, but they give artists options, I think is what he's saying.
Yeah. The thing about Albini and when he talks about how you can just make music now and distribute it on the internet,
Hmm.
he's thinking in terms of punk rock, the stuff he likes. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
three guitars, one of them a bass guitar, drums, microphones to sing into, recording into GarageBand. Like it's uh if you were a composer of symphonies, you probably cannot make your music in your bedroom using GarageBand and then distribute it. You
I
can
don't
make a
know.
you can
I
make a
don't know enough about
version.
it.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
sure. But I kept picturing a big band, like
Uh,
14 people.
mhm.
Um, I don't want to pretend that I understand everything about recording these days. I just feel like it's obvious that a 30 player or 50 player recording scenario is different than uh, being able to do like a Big Black record or Nine Inch Nails record in your bedroom with that variety of instrumentation.
Yeah, sure. I think well, I'll say this and then let's keep going with his 2013 piece. Um I think the difference is every Friday when new music comes out, there are literally hundreds of
Yeah.
albums. And that is because of the accessibility of recording technology and the accessibility of the distribution.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, even for people who listen to niche music like us in the 90s, you would go to the record store and they would have that whiteboard behind the counter that would tell you what the new albums of the week were. There were
Yeah.
like 10 at most.
Yeah. And for Albini, that was a limitation to what you could listen to or what you could find. And also that was an opportunity for music publishing to get a hold of some of the money.
Hmm. So going back to the 2013 piece, this is again him singing the praises of the internet as a distribution platform. I think they are extremely convenient for people who aren't genuine music fans, who don't want to do any legwork in finding bands.
That's the streaming services.
Yeah. But I think there is incorrect calculus being done by the people who are upset about them. I actually think the compensation is not as preposterous as anyone else. It's like complaining that cars are going faster than horses.
And then he said that music publishing as a business is extortionate. Publishing was a racket. It was not a legitimate part of the music business. And this is the people writing this piece for Quartz who did the interview and then are putting it
Mm,
together. They said that they looked at a court case between Pandora, the streaming service, and the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers, which is ASCAP. And they called ASCAP's behavior questionable when they were suing the internet company. In essence, they were saying, we own the rights to the music that you are trying to play, and so
yeah.
we need royalties. Meaning, when uh, the music industry that Albini is so angry about, this, 60s, 70s, and 80s music industry, and probably earlier than that, when they were producing records, there was always a publishing credit or a publishing right, some kind of ownership of the music itself. Now, it's not always going to be sheet music, right? That's composed before the performance, but it's like the idea of the music behind the performance is published and the performance is recorded. So there was money to be made in licensing the publishing and money to be made in licensing the recording. And I think that to Albini operated a little bit like double taxation.
Yeah, and I think part of what he's talking about here too is that he's celebrating the demise of these guys more than he's celebrating the success of the new music industry, right? Like he says in this quote, he says, "I never operated for the benefit of songwriters. Of all the things that have collapsed in the music paradigm, the one I'm most pleased to see collapse is the publishing racket." So he's thinking like these guys are out of jobs now. Great.
Well, this is his thing about like the industry was making itself money and the audience on one end and the musicians on the other end were just providing the material to be sold or the money for the selling, and it didn't seem to matter who those two groups were.
Yeah.
And the internet cut out the middleman. And now the audience is talking directly to the bands, and the bands are talking directly to the audience. He says in the same interview, if I could have been, I'm sure I would have been a nuisance to the Ramones. If the Ramones had had a Twitter feed, he would have been all over it all the time.
Sure. So it's funny. This just popped into my head. It wasn't something that I was thinking of, and I had to look it up because I'm not cool enough that I know these lyrics by heart. But the Wu-Tang song "Protect Your Neck" has this lyric. First of all, who's your A&R? A mountain climber who plays an electric guitar, but he don't know the meaning of dope when he's looking for a suit and tie wrap that's cleaner than a bar of soap. Like
Okay.
they were, that probably came out in like late 90s, I would guess. But like they were essentially making the same arguments, that the A&R guys were just these sleazy dudes who tried to convince you that, if you signed with them, it was going to lead to fame and fortune.
And you know what Zappa said about those folks? He said that early on, when the music industry was full of uh, businessmen and mafia types and folks who were just trying to make money, it would essentially be a older guy saying something like, "I
Yeah.
don't know, just put it out there. I don't know." But then after the first wave of popular music happened, then the new A&R guys, the ones that Zappa really hated, were the guys who were like, "I know what the kids want. I got the same hair."
Well, this is what Albini, yeah, he argues in the piece is he's like, oh, they'll disguise themselves as if they're one of you. and they'll come to you and the companies purposely hire these guys that seem like they have cred. I just mentioned Lyle Preslar earlier. Like Lyle Preslar was a guitar player in Minor Threat and famously went on to be an
Yeah.
A&R guy, which is like, you couldn't diverge further from Ian MacKay's ethos but his former bandmate, turned into one of those guys and went to bands and was like, I was in Minor Threat. You should sign with me.
Yeah. And we can say that, but also, Ian MacKay co-owned a record label or continues to co-own a record label. It's
Yeah,
not a
but
complete divorce from the industry.
oh, and it's not like Steve Albini didn't have business dealings with record labels. Touch and Go, they had a business relationship for probably 40 years, right? So the Quartz article actually ties into this. They say it's not just record company profits and shady A&R executives that have lost out from the internet-driven disruption of the music industry. The entire ecosystem that once supported musicians, neighborhood record stores, small recording studios like Electrical Audio, and indie record labels are struggling, right? So there's your touch and go, your Discord.
Yeah.
Um, we just did an episode about World Inferno Friendship Society, and part of that episode was about how they couldn't make enough money to sustain themselves as a band professionally.
And Albini says the internet has changed everything. I'm, summarizing. And it's changed the stuff that is good for me. It's made it harder for some things like indie record stores.
Hmm.
But also, on balance, now I'm quoting him, on balance, the things that have happened because of the internet have been tremendously good for bands and audiences, but really bad for businesses that are not part of that network, the people who are siphoning money out. I don't give a fuck about those people.
Right. He didn't mind that the ecosystem had to sort of build itself up again from scratch because it was excluding the people, or at least that's how he saw it. I don't think that's true necessarily. I personally, I don't necessarily agree with him here, and I think we're going to find that there were many rebuttals to this
Yeah.
as well. But I think his heart was in the right place, but I also think it was maybe 2013, and he didn't see what was coming down the pike with streaming audio.
Right. Well, the next year he gave a keynote at the Face the Music conference in Melbourne. And here, I mean, obviously it's very long, but here are some things that can kind of continue to illustrate what we're talking about with the problem with music. Here's a more uh, immediate rendition of the record industry that he was glad was falling apart. It was a leaky system, riddled with inefficiencies, but a lot of people made a living through it. Record store owners, buyers, employees, ad agencies, designers, club owners, label reps, A&R, producers, recording studios, publicists, lawyers, journalists, program directors, distributors, tour managers, booking agents, band managers, and all the ancillary services they required: banking, shipping, printing, photography, travel agencies, limos, spandex wardrobe, cocaine dealers, prostitutes. Because of this great bulk the industry needed to sustain itself, every facet of the industry was tailored to this need. So these independent bands had to be resourceful. They'd built their own infrastructure of independent clubs, promoters, fanzines, and DJs. They had their own channels of promotion, including the beginnings of the internet culture that is so prevalent today, that being bulletin boards and news groups. These independent bands even made their own record label. I think that he was calling Discord out at that moment there, or shouting out Discord.
Mm. Well, not just Discord, but yeah. I think when I hear this, the first thing I remember, I don't think I've even mentioned this to you before, but when I was in a band in the 90s, the way in which you booked a tour for the first time was Maximum Rock and Roll magazine
Mm,
once a year would put out a directory essentially that was in each state. These are the people who say that they put on shows, and here's their phone number. And that's, we mentioned this in the World Inferno episode about how they reached out to me and asked if I would put on a show for them. That's how I was
yeah.
listed in there. Um, this is what he's talking about. Like this was this sort of underground network. I guess Tim Yohannan and the people who worked at Maximum Rock and Roll made some money off of that. And ultimately, the shows that I played that were booked out of there were not particularly great. It was like in basements in people's houses, but that was the culture. We didn't make money off of it, but it was still what we were looking to do.
What this all makes me think of is newspapers, because for some period of time, newspapers were essential to everyone because of the classifieds.
Yeah. Hmm.
And when Craigslist came along, when the internet was able to do what classified advertising did,
Hmm.
they took that away from newspapers essentially. And they made that so much more convenient and inexpensive for people. But by
Hmm.
taking it out of newspapers, newspapers began to fail.
Yeah, but then let's take it a step further. This is the late stage capitalism part. This is the enshittification part. So Craigslist, that's where everything went for a while. And there was a time where you and I and people like us used Craigslist for everything we would have used the classifieds for, everything from finding a new job to finding a place to live, right?
Sure.
Now you go on Craigslist, 90% of the listings are
A-
all fake. It's all
Absolutely.
scammers.
But you're
They're
jumping
all
it.
trying to screw you over.
Totally. You're jumping ahead though. Go back to the newspaper and think of the newspaper as the music industry.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, no moral equivalence, but the newspaper was surviving because the classifieds made it essential for the newspaper to get purchased. And when it was no longer essential to buy the newspaper, then it had to start changing. It had to start becoming something else.
Yeah.
Albini is delighted that the classifieds are free of the newspaper.
And so this I see what you're saying, but I also think maybe this is it. When Albini is saying this, we didn't understand enshittification yet.
Oh
We didn't
yeah, 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 yeah,
understand
yeah.
that the platforms that were distributing this music were going to make it more and more difficult for us to consume the music, more and more difficult for the people creating the music to put their music on there. And eventually they're gonna like eat their own tail, right?
Well,
In the same way that Craigslist already
yeah.
has, we're beginning to see Spotify do that.
So we can't say with like immediate authority how the music industry works right now. But
Sure.
something we can talk about pretty carefully is podcasting.
100%. I
You,
already wrote it down.
yeah,
Yeah.
you and I were making podcasts before the world turned, and when it was actually the wild, wild west.
Well,
And we even
let me,
came in late. We weren't
we
even
did.
part of that
Yeah.
first wave. But now, it's like the industry has been bought out from underneath us.
Yes. And so I wrote down in my notes here, I said, this isn't just music. There's no money to be made in music, but it's not just music anymore. It's all art, comics, writing, fiction, art, podcasts.
Yeah.
And our last episode of the first iteration of Super Context was all about this. It was about our journey starting this podcast, trying to make a go of it independently, trying to run it like a small business, and essentially failing.
Yeah.
Um, and we've come back and we're doing it our way now. We're not we're making a little money, enough to pay the server fees,
This is so just for us.
but it's just for us, yeah. But that's because the podcast industry in less than 20 years changed as fast as the music industry did over the course of 50 to 60 years. And this is my argument against what Albini's saying here is you could say, oh, well, Charlie and Chris can record a podcast on their laptops with each other from across the country and they can put it out for a nominal fee and anybody has access to it. Sure. But there is such a noise to signal ratio that it
Hmm.
is next to impossible for us to build an audience unless somebody with deep pockets pays for the promotion. And I'm happy to fucking shit talk my former employers again, but we talked about this in that last episode from 2020. In that they at one point said if we signed Super Context over to them, they would give us $250,000 in promotion, an in-kind promotion specifically, right? They weren't going to spend $250,000. They would advertise Super Context on their shows for what they valued at
Yeah.
$250,000.
Which you had kind of already done by being on the shows and launching a podcast while you were there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, 90% of our audience comes from that. Yeah.
Okay, let us pull back from the hell that we almost dipped into.
I'm
And
just saying it's not just music.
yeah,
And
yeah.
I think that the democratization that we were all excited about in the 2010s turned into the hell that you're talking about now in the 2020s.
And Albini in 2014 was not ignoring that. Here's something from that keynotes that he gave. That was the system as it was, he said, which is the independent labels, independent distributors, the infrastructure that they built as essentially punk rock bands that could keep 50% of their net profit and not turn it over to that litany of middlemen that he was talking about before.
Mm.
That's what we lost, Albini says, when the internet made everything available everywhere for free. And make no mistake about it, we have lost it. There is still an independent label network, but it's a slim fraction of what it was. The labels continuing to survive do so by supplying niche music to a discerning audience. And because they have been steeled in the art of efficiency, their constitution allows them to scale everything to suit the remaining demand.
I feel like you are more in tune with this than I am. In that, like, I listen to new music, but I don't know that I necessarily understand the economics of how it's distributed as much anymore. Whereas, like, because you're involved with a college radio station, I feel like you maybe have a better idea than I do.
I mean, I have a more immediate interaction with it. Like I get all of the so I have a radio show called Lost in the Stacks on WREK Atlanta. And just the fact of that means my email address is on hundreds, if not thousands, of independent promotion mailing lists. Not that I ever put it there. It just gets grabbed and distributed. So
Right.
I get all kinds of stuff. I get emails from individuals who are like, "Hi, I hope that you like my music. Here it is attached," you know? And I get, "Hey, Lost in the Stacks, we think that the brand new power pop single from so and so would be a perfect fit for your mix of intellectual talk and, you know, or whatever."
So this is exactly the direction I wanted to go in, right? And we're jumping ahead, but Albini's argument is that labels and publishers become irrelevant in the 2010s, right? So what did labels and publishers do? They paid for recording, they paid for tour management, they did distribution, and those things are all gone. Those are all essentially no longer
Yeah.
the function of a label.
When we say gone, we don't mean literally no one does that anymore,
Right.
but you know,
But
if you
that's not
think
the
about it,
appeal for
yeah,
signing with them.
and if you think about how much you pay for tickets these days to
Hmm.
big acts who have to carry around their lighting rigs in a truck and
Yeah.
all of the support staff for the tour in another bus besides the bus the artist has.
But what they do pay for still, and this is going back to that podcast model, they pay for the promotion. So when you go to your Spotify or whatever your poison of choice is, right? The curation of the playlists, that doesn't just happen because somebody at Spotify is like, oh, I like this band. This should go at the top of this playlist. It's the same thing as radio used to be. It's pay to play. And you get placement depending on how much money your label invests or you invest into. So I think we've talked about this recently. I switched from YouTube Music a couple months ago to Deezer because
Now,
because of the whole
why do you laugh and make me laugh at the fact that it's Deezer?
because I don't think Deezer is necessarily all that much better. It's just it's not Google. It's not one of the stacks,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
But I literally I sat down and I did research. I spent time looking at all the streaming platforms and tried to choose the one that was the least bad. The one the one that had the least shady ownership and maybe gave a couple more pennies to people per song that got played. But I'm looking at Deezer right now. I pulled it up on my other screen, and it's funny. Like they do the same thing as all the other platforms where they're like, "Oh, here are some playlists that we think you should check out, but they're made specifically for you, you know?"
Yeah.
Like here's a this is a playlist made in Sound City, and the records they recommend to me are Fleetwood Mac, The Grateful Dead, Tom Petty, and Rage Against the Machine. And then this one's funny to me. Rock alternatif with an F from the 2000s. Stories from the City, Stories from the Sea by PJ Harvey.
Hmm.
Demon Days by Gorilla. This is funny to me because this album is showing up on my screen and it is on a poster behind you over your left shoulder right now.
Oh, there you go.
Funeral by Arcade Fire, right? And it's those aren't just showing up there because they're like, oh, these, there is money behind that.
Yeah, those are big label
There's
releases.
a reason why Fugazi doesn't show up in those
Yeah.
lists because they're not paying for it.
Okay. Let's go back to Albini. There's so the keynote that we've been reading from this, this last iteration of what he has to say, it's
Yeah.
7,000 words. It's huge.
Yeah, we don't
And
need to read all of this.
yeah, but I did find this phrase in short. So let me read this one. In short, the internet has made it much easier to conduct the day-to-day business of being in a band and has increased the efficiency. Now, he talks about the business of being in a band, but if we go back to the problem with music, for him, the problem with music is that everything that was necessary, essential to make music and connect with an audience was hard and took a lot of work and a lot of money. And the major labels were willing to make that less hard, not frictionless, but less hard. And they could make it seem like it was all taken care of. And for Albini, his warning was it's always taken out of your return. It's always you're always
Hmm.
paying for it. Here's the money. Let me show you the money trail of how you don't make any money because you've already paid everything you could have made into
Yeah.
recording, transport, the tour bus, the food at the party, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
The way that I read it is the problem with music for him in 1993 was middlemen, right? Whether those middlemen were A&R reps or they were people who called themselves producers, people who inserted themselves into the process but were not necessary to it. And under the premise of if you work with us, you will find success.
Yeah, and you'll be signed with a label. Everything will
Yeah.
be so much easier.
But you know what they were?
Product.
They were grifters.
Oh, sorry. They were grifters who had bought a product that they were going to resell.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now, Albini also described the internet as facilitating, quote, the most direct and efficient compact relationship ever between band and audience. I do not mourn the loss of the offices of inefficiencies that died in the process. And then the guy had a turn of phrase.
He
Uh,
did.
I suppose some people are out of work, but the same things happened when the automobile replaced the horse and all the blacksmiths had to adapt, spending their time making garden gates rather than horseshoes.
Well, I
Now,
think again, this shows his ethos too, right? In
yeah,
that, like, he saw himself as a working class musician and that it was a trade.
yeah, and that you were making something that you wanted to then either sell or have experienced collectively.
I know we don't want to read this entire thing, but I feel like we would be remiss if I didn't read this one paragraph, which is
Do it.
classic Albini and just goes to
Oh
show
yeah,
that he
of
was
course you want to
still a
read
little
this
bit
one.
edgelordy.
All right, hit it.
Um, it's no longer necessary to spend money to let people hear your band. It happens automatically. Imagine a great hall of fetishes where whatever you felt like fucking or being fucked by, however often your tastes might change, no matter what hardware or harnesses were required, you could open the gates and have at it on a comfy mattress at any time of the day. That's what the internet has become for music fans, plus bleacher seats for a cheering section. Speaking of turning a phrase.
Yeah. Now, a writer named Jim Carroll at the Irish Times, he basically says Albini was optimistic about how the internet changed the industry. It's Look at this. He says there's rough times, but he's also happy with the new system overall. And that's going to be the key to the people who kind of go against this,
Hmm.
right? So
Hmm.
Albini is saying, I'm glad that the ways that the grifters were making money are being taken away. But he's not saying, and we're making less money. And that
Yeah.
seems to be the argument. And I'm jumping a little bit ahead, but I just want to like hit that bell before we slide into the folks who support Albini's vision.
Yeah. And there's one other quote from Albini's Melbourne speech that I think is important to understanding where he's coming from. And I think maybe will help us understand too going forward. He says, my band, he's talking about Shellac, has been playing a lot of the same places for the entirety of our existence for over 20 years now. I guess you could say that we've saturated our audience because no matter how long we stay at it, some of these perennial gigs are now paying an over of magnitude better than they were 10 or 15 years ago. That's right. Some places where we used to earn $400 or $500, we now earn 4 or 5 grand.
Yeah.
Okay, yes, but even before he started Shellac, he is a known quantity within that music community. That saturated audience is going to go see him no matter what. And you and I were part of that, right? Even if it's in an art gallery in downtown Atlanta, as opposed to, I've seen them in clubs, I've seen them in theaters, but they had an audience already. Whereas like I'm trying to think of somebody. Um, okay, here's a good example. You and I had talked about this musician a couple of years ago. What is her name? Victory Over the Sun. You know who I'm
Oh
talking
yeah,
about?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
The like black metal solo
Microtones. Yeah.
musician. Yeah. Um, somebody like that who just starts up in their bedroom and like plays all the instruments and then just would go out and even though like they're getting critical acclaim on blogs and things like that, would they have the same ability to go out and make $4 or $5,000 at each show that they go to? Or is that because Albini's already tied into that community? He's already, and it's not just him, right? But like everybody in his band, the label that he's working with, the booking agents that he knows, he was tied into that.
Yeah. And also there's ticket price inflation, inflation in general,
Totally. Yeah.
you know. He also makes the point to say that the merch tables um are more used, I think is what he said, that there's more money in merch. And I don't know that that's anything more than anecdotal data about the current condition of the music scene that he's into. I don't know if that's like proof that the music industry has gone one way or another.
I can only speak to it anecdotally, but I can tell you that every time I go to a show now, there's a line at the
Yeah.
merch table in a way that there didn't used to be before the show even starts. And I think I've mentioned this. I think I even complained about it recently on an episode that younger kids seem to do this thing where they buy the shirt at the show before the band starts and then put it on at the show.
Oh.
and
Christopher.
this isn't me complaining about it. This is me saying I think there's evidence for Albini's argument that merch sells more than it used to.
Yes. Um,
And of note, Shellac did not sell merch at their
yeah.
shows.
I was trying to quote a movie and then I realized that the character I was trying to quote is Christopher. So it sounds like I think your name's Christopher. So I'm going to throw that one away.
Okay.
Hey, Chris, you know how old you sound right now?
So
You
old.
sound like
I
a
know.
fucking boomer.
I know. I know I do. I know. I'm happy to lean into the cantankerous old man on this one issue. But but I think it's true from what I've seen. And from what I've heard too, just like um bands are making more shirts than they normally would, more options of shirts for their tours
Yeah.
because that it's like popcorn at movie theaters. That's where the money's made.
Right. And there's more, excuse me, there's fewer opportunities to uh, sell records when a lot of people are streaming the record. And so
Right.
you want to sell a thing that you can make for a small amount and sell for an inflated amount because it is got the aura.
Yeah.
So, funny thing, Chris, I
Mm.
know that this moment we're just interrupting the flow of the podcast because we never called out an ad break. We never said, let's take a break and come back.
Oh yeah. That's we're totally off our game.
Yeah, we're
Yeah.
just trundling along. I think I want to take this moment to appreciate that you and I do an independent podcast that we distribute through a company that does not affect our content, our performance, our style, our decisions in any way.
We pay them like you would pay a plumber.
Exactly. And they stay hands off. And every time they suggest that we add ads to the beginning and the end, I say, no, thank you.
Oh, I didn't know they do that now.
Oh
They
my
do?
God. Yeah, they do all the fucking time. So you've ruined my appreciation. We do live in a nation of grifters. Everything we do is monetized, including us asking for money. So, hey, you who's listening right now and kind of wondering what the fuck we're up to, go to patreon.com/supercontext. Join us at a supporter level for $1 a month and let Chris and I keep talking to each other about our personal demons, our funny problems, and our love of problematic favorites.
I am gonna give a little extra shout out to Patreon this time around because I recently learned there's more going on Patreon than I was aware of because of Charlie. Charlie is putting effort into Patreon and engaging with our listeners there in a way that I wasn't aware of because
Well, you were
I've just
detached
been,
for some very particular reasons, and I thought,
yeah.
hey, let me go ahead and just try some stuff out.
But I went and I was recently on there and I was like, oh wow, like he's like starting up conversations and throwing out like, ideas in between episodes and things like that. So, not only is there like this whole archive of stuff on there that only exists on there that we created, but also you get to engage with Charlie. And in theory, through Charlie, you could engage with me through Patreon as long as you put what, $1 a month into it.
Yeah.
Actually, I think even the posts people see for free. Yeah.
Um, I don't want to really cop to anything in particular, Chris, but I might have locked a few things down just for the hell of it.
Oh, okay. Okay. I see how it is.
I'm a
A&R.
hypocrite, as in all things. But also I kind of like the club, patreon.com/supercontext. To now recap. Steve Albini in 1993 wrote an article, a kind of vicious article about um, how bad the music industry was for musicians. He wanted it to be a warning for his friends. Don't get involved. The money's no good. It's corrupt. Here's why. And about 20 years later, he's talking about, hey, the internet has solved a lot of those problems.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that the people I warned them about have lost a lot of their pull on
hmm
us.
hmm
But then there's this other little thing about streaming royalties that we have to deal with.
hmm So, so there's sort of two types of articles that came up when I was searching about the problem of music. There were the people that either supported that article or supported what he said in courts or Australia, or there were the people who refuted
Yeah.
those things. So let's
I mean, that's
start.
one of the wonderful things about this article is that
Yeah.
it generates the conversation. So we're
So
going to
let's
talk a little
start
bit
with the
about that. Yeah.
support section. So Quartz magazine, even within the same magazine that he gave that interview in, John McDulling from Court says many aspiring musicians and music journalists of a certain vintage would have come across this inspirational piece of writing thanks largely to the internet. He's talking about the problem with music. So it's quite fitting that since then, the same irrepressible force, the internet, has largely dismantled the profit centers the music industry has relied on for most of its existence. Is that true?
Um, I this is in essence us trying to get numbers for book sales.
Hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like we can talk about how it feels and what it looks like, but we
Mm-hmm.
don't have access to the numbers. I think let's go ahead and trust that. Let's talk about how people respond to this.
Yeah,
Let's talk about what it made people say. For
that sounds
instance,
fair.
in the libertarian magazine Reason, Peter Suderman wrote the gist of the article, The Problem with Music, was a sort of punk radical anti corporate argument that the entire music industry was set up to benefit everyone: the studios and the scouts, the image consultants and video makers, the lawyers and the managers, except the fans and the musicians. This was an essay that people interested in the alternative music scene talked about for years afterwards. It was published, now he says 94. It's published in 94, Suderman says, but I don't think I heard about it until the late 90s because it seemed to capture and diagram the slimy, stupid awfulness of the generic corporate captured music that dominated the era. And it's funny he uses corporate captured like almost like regulatory capture, the
Oh, interesting. Yeah,
Reason's got its own, way of talking about stuff.
sure. Yeah.
Not only that, it came at an unusual time for the punk alternative community. The big labels appeared to be handing out zillion-dollar record contracts to punk and indie rock bands with roughly the same sort of attitude that one throws parade candy into a crowd. Garage bands with 6 songs and 3 shows under their belt were being shown big dollar signs, snapped up and pushed through the corporate music grinder, or at least that's what it felt like. And there you
Mm.
go, back to that's what it felt like. So much of what
Yeah.
the problem with music brings out of people is their assessment of what they saw happening to bands they liked in genres they liked.
Yeah, I'm thinking so I just finished reading Nico Case's memoir. And she talks in it about how very early in her career, so this would have been late 90s, early 2000s, I think, that she had maybe had one album under her belt and was pursued by a major label and wanted to be courted by that major label, and it fell through, and she was kind of devastated by it.
Yeah.
And then later realized like that she dodged a bullet, you
Yeah,
know.
she lucked out.
Yeah, and the other thing, this may or may not be in Commodify Your Dissent. I can't remember, but I remember reading an interview with Kim Coletta from Jawbox, who Jawbox was a Discord band that signed to a major label, put out 2 records on a major label, and I remember her talking about how the big wake up call when they did that was that there was no health insurance.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, I want to read this last thing from Reason, and then I want to jump to the folks who have a problem with Albini.
Mm,
But it's interesting. The folks who have a problem with Albini mostly have a problem with his internet stance, not so much his problem with
yeah.
music stance.
Yeah.
Albini's essay, this is in Reason. Albini's essay made such a big impact in part because it was arguing that you could sell out and still manage to not get paid, which was about as strong an argument against selling out and going mainstream as one could imagine. And of course, Albini's credibility on the subject was more or less unimpeachable because, as we used to say, he'd been there and done that.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. Um, let's get into the criticism stuff. I guess I want to position myself this way and maybe convince me that I'm wrong if you can. That I agree with the problem with music, but I think I disagree with the 2017 presentation in Melbourne. Um, and I think that's maybe the position that I've taken so far in this episode is that I see where he's coming from with this democratization thing, but I don't think it's played out the way that he had hoped it would.
I think that's probably true. Although I think it's true partly in that Albini imagined that everyone would prefer to listen to Victory Over the Sun, you know, in their recorded in their bedroom and released and seen in a small club,
Yeah.
but that you wouldn't you wouldn't be dying to go to the Mastodon Eagles of Death Metal Russian Circles show at the Fox Theater, which
Hmm.
still requires all of that infrastructure,
Yeah.
but now just
Yeah.
has to be paid for in a different way and is stressed by the fact that there's not a bunch of record sales, only streaming to support the outlay, the investment in a tour like that.
Yeah. I think part of why I feel strongly about this too. There's a book that I read a couple years ago that I've recommended to you. I don't know if I've mentioned it on the show. I might have even given you a copy of this. I can't remember. The Death of the Artist by William Dereshowitz,
Hmm.
um, which is essentially each chapter is him going through every art form and how it's been torn apart by big tech.
Okay, you definitely didn't give that to me because I would have read that immediately if you'd put it in my hand.
Yeah, I know that there's I'm not going to get into it now, but I know that people have issues with that guy online. But that book is fascinating.
So let's get into the response to Albini, the leapfrogging response, because I want to make this very clear. And again, this is why this is kind of a different super context. You and I have had a weird time leading up to this episode. So
Ugh,
it's a little bit all over the place.
you ain't kidding.
Yeah. And I think that's fine. Um, but also, the problem with music, it did what it did at the time. Uh, but then that was a reason for people to ask Albini, what do you think now that the internet happened? And him say, I think it's awesome. But then we have some other folks, heroes to you and I, at
Yeah,
least one of them,
yeah.
who say, not so great what happened with the internet.
Hmm.
David Byrne of
Ladies and gentlemen, David Byrne.
Talking Heads and a David Yao bit on a live recording. He wrote in The Guardian in 2013, roughly the same time that Albini was saying, Yay, internet.
Hmm.
The amounts these services pay per stream is minuscule. Their idea being that if enough people use the service, those tiny grains of sand will pile up. We should readjust our values because in the web based world, we are told that monopoly is good for us. Now, I think what Byrne is saying there is um, I've been told that the way they're going to compensate me for my music being streamed, which they have the rights to, because David Byrne, despite all of his indie cred, David Byrne's records with the Talking Heads were on a major label. He
Sure.
signed the
Yeah.
contracts. This is Alan Moore being pissed off that his stuff is being used by DC, right? It
A little
it's
different. David Byrne hasn't said I won't take the money.
No, I'm not talking about the
Yeah.
actual details. I'm saying that
Yeah.
Alan Moore's done a lot of independent stuff that he has control over,
Yeah.
but there's
Yeah.
still, from when he was coming up, the major label or the, comics industry was
Yeah.
operating in a certain way. He was not free of it yet, and his work is owned by a
Yeah.
corporation, and the corporation is now monetizing that work.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
we talk about Alan Moore so much. So David Byrne is saying the streams for his music is paid in such a minute way He references David Lowery of Cracker and Camper Van Beethoven, who said, "My song got played on Pandora 1 million times, and all I got was $16.89, less than what I make from a single t-shirt sale." And to be honest, that that sentence is kind of all we need as the full critique of Albini's attitude towards the internet.
Hmm. Hmm.
For a band of four people, David Byrne writes, that makes a 15% royalty from Spotify streams, it would take 236,549,020 streams for each person to earn a minimum wage of $15,080 a year. For perspective, Daft Punk's song of the summer, Get Lucky, reached over a million Spotify streams by the end of August. The two Daft,
104 million. So
oh, sorry.
so
Uh,
half
yeah,
of what his calculation is to make
yeah,
minimum wage. Daft Punk made half of minimum wage off of their biggest song, I
yeah.
think.
It
Yeah.
said the two Daft Punk guys stand to make somewhere around $13,000 each. Not bad, but remember, this is just one song from a lengthy recording that took a lot of time and money to develop. They won't pay their bills if it's their principal source of income. And what happens to the bands who don't have massive international summer hits?
Hmm.
In the future, if artists have to rely almost exclusively on the income from these services, they'll be out of work within a year. Okay, I love David Byrne.
Yeah.
However, David Byrne saying, if we have to rely on the income from these services, we'll be out of work in a year, is him saying, I want the money, you know?
Well,
And,
he's also, yes,
and
and he's also not taking into account the money from touring. And I think this is a part of Albini's argument that is lost between the lines, which is like Albini's like the money shouldn't be made off of the recordings.
exactly.
It should be made off of you playing music in front of people.
And Albini is basically saying, this is what's lost.
Yeah.
You can't get the royalties to the music that you sold. Like this, I think Albini would say a little bit of like, hey, now you're in the trench of shit. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
you managed to dodge it somehow, at first. You had control enough and you were famous enough that you weren't getting completely hosed by your label. But now you are. Now it's coming home to roost.
Yeah, but Burns' argument is almost exactly the same as about Burns' argument about internet era music distribution is almost the same as Albini's argument in The Problem with Music. He says major labels are happy, the consumer's happy, and the CEOs of web services are happy. That's all good, except no one is left to speak for those who actually make the stuff.
Yeah. He said,
But at the same time, I can't help but think about the Eagles. I don't know if you knew
I
this.
thought you hated the Eagles.
Oh no. Oh no. No, I grew up on the Eagles. I
Okay.
understand why other people hate the Eagles, but it's unfortunately the Eagles are in my blood.
Okay.
Um,
See,
but
there it is when you just said, unfortunately. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Oh, I recognize why they're anyways. Uh,
yeah.
look, the Eagles were adamant about not putting their music on YouTube for a very long time.
Yeah.
Like you would go to YouTube Music, and I think there was only like a smattering of Eagles songs that were available, and eventually they cracked. Or maybe just enough members of the Eagles died that the remaining members were able to override their decisions about their copyrights. I don't know, but it ultimately, I think for um, musicians of a certain caliber that were used to making a certain paycheck every year off the
Yeah.
royalties, they were like, "What the fuck? Why are we no longer making X million of dollars a year off of Hotel California?"
Yeah. And this is David Byrne talking about that change in how the
Yeah,
money comes to you. The larger question is that if free or cheap streaming becomes the way we consume all recorded music, and indeed a huge percentage of other creative content, then perhaps we might stop for a moment and consider the effect these services and this technology will have before, quote unquote, selling off all our cultural assets the way the big record companies did. If, for instance, the future of the movie business comes to rely on the income from Netflix's $8 a month streaming service as a way to fund all films and TV production, then things will change very quickly. Now, let us point out he knew
Mhm.
what he was talking about and he called it
Well,
because
yeah,
it's
so
happening right now.
16 years later, Netflix almost bought Warner Brothers, but Paramount outbid them.
Yeah. And the way that some people make movies and television is based on Netflix house style, which is in order to
Mhm.
compensate for people who are looking at their phone while the thing
Yep.
plays.
Yep. Yeah, I saw a fascinating video about the last season of Stranger Things and how frequently the characters repeat their dialogue
Yep.
over and over again,
Hmm.
specifically to accommodate for that.
David Byrne says, what's at stake is not so much the survival of artists like me, but that of emerging artists and those who have only a few records under their belts. Many musicians, like St. Vincent, my current touring partner, who is not exactly an unknown, seem to be well established, well known, and very talented, but will eventually have to find employment elsewhere or change what they do to make more money.
See, that's absurd. Like St. Vincent was not going to have to go find employment elsewhere. This is
Okay, okay.
he's taken a little too far there.
But the
Here
point
we are
is,
16 years later
yeah,
and
yeah.
she's still huge, if not bigger than she ever was before.
But this is what a very successful major label artist was saying
Yeah.
at the
Yeah.
time that Albini was saying, I'm so glad the labels are falling apart. David Byrne,
Yeah.
who we don't think is a corporate stooge at all,
No,
was,
I think you and I hold both of these guys in
yeah, totally.
reverence, but we disagree with them in different
Yeah.
ways as well. Yeah.
But he declared, if you can't make money off of your music, you won't try to connect with the audience. It
Yeah.
won't work out like Albini said. Uh, Many a fan has said that music saved my life, so there must be some incentive to keep that lifesaver available for future generations.
I think we have to pull the curtain back for a second and reveal that yesterday I sent you an email or a text to David Byrne performing on one of the last episodes of Stephen Colbert's show.
Yep.
And I think I said national treasure and you said something like this is what I needed today.
Yeah.
Like, you know.
I mean, yeah, totally. I mean, to see a 74-year-old man do a deep knee bend slowly while playing an acoustic guitar
Hmm.
and then almost not get back up again. Oh my God, it was bliss.
He's living his best life.
But let us say that other
This
punk
is almost like
rockish.
a tour through our past episodes when I'm looking at
I
these
know. Here's
people
Gang
who
of
are
Four.
cited.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We've got Dave Allen responding to David Byrne. So we've got this little daisy chain of like, so Albini says, everybody watch out. The labels are going to kill us. And
Hmm.
then the internet comes along and then he's like, hey, thank God, look at that. It's changing how the labels are going to kill us. And then David Byrne said, oh my God, if you kill the labels, I won't be able to make my money anymore. And people won't be able to be like me. They won't be able to make the money that will help them keep making music.
Yeah.
And it's very special. So we need to have it. And then Dave Allen, a bassist for Gang of Four, a art, rock, punk, rock, dance kind of group, says about David Byrne and Tom York, who also said many of the same things that Byrne said. What we have here are two bold statements from two bold-faced musicians who want to save musicians in a so-called dying music industry, and yet, for all their best intentions, I believe they are doing music and musicians a disservice. And of course, as the articles are shared far and wide across the apparently much hated web, they become gospel to those who read them, and unfortunately become quasi religious texts to musicians of all stripes who blame the internet for everything that is wrong with their careers. Which is a neat, and now this is Charlie, which is a neat little thing because he kind of taps the ghost of the problem with music.
Hmm.
Because the problem with music is also quasi religious text for musicians of all stripes who might blame major labels for everything that is wrong with their careers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Dave Allen continues. The internet and Spotify and any other streaming music service are not to blame for musicians' problems. It is hard for me to understand why intelligent people like David Byrne and Tom York do not appear to understand that we are in the midst of new markets being formed. And this is going back now. This is what supports Albini's internet contention. I would also add that many journalists and media commentators don't understand this phenomenon either. It is not about technology. It's about systems and societal shifts. It's about music business bubbles. I have been wrong in my thinking about Spotify in the past. After much debate and a reappraisal of my own stance, I have concluded that we can only look to what internet and mobile users are doing or want to do, and then note how their actions drive technologists to provide platforms for them.
I do want to pause for a second. This is well before I think people were aware that the CEO of Spotify was funneling money
Mm, yeah,
into hate groups.
good. Okay, yes. Uh, the end of that thought is put very simply, that is how markets work. Okay, thank you for the reminder. I totally forgot about Spotify and all that shit.
That's only in the last 2 years,
Yeah,
I think, as we're recording this.
but Dave Allen, like Albini, is coming from, I'm going to say, almost like a Marxist assessment.
I mean, that
You know,
was Gang of Four's thing,
yeah,
right? Like, I think so.
this is how uh, markets are driven and drive technology. And it's almost like the music is not the important part. It's the understanding of what people do in order to achieve consumer satisfaction or to supply the goods for consumer
The means
satisfaction.
of production.
And so Dave Allen says, should the recording industry be saved and do musicians need saving? I have no interest in saving the recording industry in its current form since it was set up to exploit musicians. So 20 years later, there's still people saying, nope, music industry exploits musicians.
Yeah.
It pays low royalties to musicians for sales of their work in return for providing money so they can record their work. It's just a restatement of the problem with music right there.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah. He says it is not hyperbole to suggest that this generation's music fans want to rent their music, not own it. Spotify may not have created that shift, but they certainly provided a solution to easy access mobile music streaming. They simply saw consumer demand just as any company in any marketplace would. I'm certain that Spotify would want every single music fan on its service to pay the monthly subscription. But is it Spotify's fault if we choose not to do that and listen to the ad supported version instead? This generation's music fans are using streaming services to create their own programming. And how many musicians out there in the world use Spotify? I bet there are many. This is a really good opportunity for you to tell your story about when you talked to Ian MacKaye about Spotify.
Okay, I met Ian MacKaye at the Discord house in 2015 or 2016, and it was a delight. He got along with my dad amazingly because they were both Arlington born, um, just like dudes. And I was a bit of a fanboy, of course, and I was laughing with Mackay about like, hey, I found Fugazi on Spotify for the first time. I guess that just happened recently. But you know what? I was so mad at Spotify because they just slammed an ad at the end of Margin Walker and before, and the same. Like they cut off that segue, and it was just like, oh, you guys are ruining everything. And Mackay went, you know, you put that ad there by not paying for the ad-free service.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, but I mean, I think that speaks to the point made here by Gang of Four's bassist, right? That like one way or another, somebody, whether it was Spotify or not, was going to come in and fill that space that consumers were looking for. And I think too, like, you know, we're sort of skipping over a whole moment in the economy of the music industry, which is between Steve Albini writing The Problem with Music and Steve Albini writing his speech in 2017, there was free file sharing for about a decade there
Hmm.
where people just weren't paying anything. And I, companies like Spotify, I honestly, I don't fully understand it. We're able to convince all of us that no, pay $10 a month or whatever it is, and you'll have access to everything and you don't have to go through LimeWire or Napster or whatever it is and go digging around and get bad quality files. We'll just make sure that it's all high quality and we'll give a fraction of a penny to
Yeah.
to the musicians that you listen to.
So we have a lot more from a bunch of folks, but I honestly think I think we've sort of exhausted this part of the Steve Albini, the problem with music super context.
Hmm.
Because the article, The Problem with Music, was a warning to his musician friends about how the major labels would handle them if they signed with them. And he was delighted that the internet and file sharing and all of that disrupted that system. He was
Hmm.
so disgusted by how major labels worked that he was willing to take the hit of like, yeah, they'll pass my music around for free in order to see the music industry get weakened.
Mm.
But just like many things, um, the democratizing force of file sharing and streaming music, it was colonized by that same industry. They kind of
Yeah.
recapitulated what they were doing before.
That's exactly it. The people, I think this is where I would disagree with Albini, right? The people who would have been A&R reps in the 90s are now middle managers at Spotify.
I mean, that sounds perfectly right. But more than anything, it's that the money is going to be made, right? As long as people are using consumer services that are not supported, but supplied by major labels.
Hmm.
And there hasn't been enough damage to the music industry for the major labels to all fail and not have their huge acts and their A&R and
Sure. Yeah.
all of that. And what David Byrne is talking about is, hey, they're now monetizing the music that I made for records as streaming, and we didn't sign contracts about streaming, so they're just sort of making it happen. And um, I don't, David Byrne, I think, is saying, I don't believe that people will be able to have their career the way I did if this is how streaming works.
Yeah.
And Albini was a little bit like, you shouldn't have had that career.
Exactly. And I think, yeah, I think that's it, right? Albini is making the same argument as Gang of Four guy that um, new markets are popping up and there's different ways that musicians make their living, but it's not the same ways in which David Byrne made his living. This is all really interesting to me too. I don't remember when it came out. You and I have talked about potentially doing an episode about that David Byrne book, which is it called How Music Works?
Yeah.
Um, because that book is so good and he dives so deep into thinking about um, the presentation of music, whether it's in a recorded setting or a live setting. But it seems like the economic part of it is he's only able to see it from the perspective of how he did it.
Well, here's the thing to remember is that, well, not even to remember. Here's the thing I see. Albini is talking about being a fan of music also. He's talking about
Mhm.
finding bands. And Byrne was talking purely about being a producer of music and was
Yeah.
saying if musicians can't make a living, they won't make music. And Albini was sort of saying, we're all going to make music together. We're going to
Yeah.
define the scene together. That's what punk rock is, and that's what's so great about it.
Hmm.
You found this great thing, this kind of wonderful summation of all the stuff we're talking about on Boing Boing. Tom Dunn wrote this after Albini died, um, and kind of summed up what we're talking about here. So he says, I've been thinking a lot about Albini's infamous 1993 essay, The Problem with Music. It's a great summation of Albini's work ethic and non-edgelord perspective. Well, okay. The way that, as Sam Adams so succinctly put it in Slate, Albini stubbornly insisted on, quote, a material description of his labor to the vague idea that he had somehow produced something, unquote. It's going back to that engineer thing, right?
Yeah.
He didn't produce records. He was a recording engineer on records, and he wasn't going to share in the royalties because he didn't make the music.
Hmm.
Um, and then Tom says, there are so many choice quotes in The Problem with Music that really capture and articulate that almost Marxist approach to the music industry. And that's back when the music industry was throwing out money left and right. I certainly understand the idea that you need to spend money to make money, but the idea of spending $250,000 in order to make 12 times as much wealth based on almost entirely the labor of four people who make a fraction of a percent of that money, that's absolutely wild. Now that's some rough writing, and that might be a little bit of cut and paste problems, but this is about exploiting work. This is about alienating people from the fruit of their labor. And then he writes, it's a depressingly realistic look at how every creative industry works. The exact details might change, but if you do the accounting for book publishing or mainstream journalism or most TV and film productions, at the end of the day, the ratios are essentially the same. Someone makes a thing, someone fronts the money to turn that thing into a product, and a bunch of rich people make a ton more money without actually doing, let alone creating, much of anything. So we have a problem in this country of refusing Marxist analysis because communism was such a true and material disaster, right?
Yeah. Because Americans conflate the two things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But a Marxist analysis is simply that. It's an analysis of a situation based on Marx's lens or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think that punk rock and Steve Albini's brand of punk rock is particularly well suited for Marxist analysis.
Yeah, I think too, I don't know. I would assume somebody like Albini had either read Marx or was familiar with it in passing from his time in counterculture. But even if he wasn't, the community that he came from, um, was so much more focused on the practical economics
Yeah.
of being a musician than frankly David Byrne's were.
And Albini had that ethical stance that was pro labor and labor
Yeah.
focused. Like the quote in the letter he wrote to Nirvana when they were considering him as the engineer for their In Utero album, he said, I would like to be paid like a plumber. I will come and do a job. I will be the person that makes something work for you that's not working, and then
Hmm.
you'll pay me. I can't participate in the royalties. I wouldn't be able to sleep at night. And I'm
Yeah.
conflating a bunch of different pieces, but
But at the same time, plumbers aren't interviewed 30 years later by Conan O'Brien about a job that they did in the 90s.
that's true. But I am going to grant Albini his ethical stance. He did say, and this is back to the Alan Moore thing, he did say, I'm not going to take a piece of the money that the bands make.
Yeah.
I am going to do a job for them, and they're going to then go and do what they need to do. I'm not going to pretend that I have a stake in it. And that's
Yeah.
kind of, that's the core of what he hated about the corporate music industry. And that's what David Byrne hates about the corporate music industry too. He's just coming at it from a very different point of view. He's
Yeah.
like, they're monetizing my work. They say they've got a stake in it, and they're using a system that undoes my ability to make money off of my work by
Hmm.
reducing the amount that I get for each time it's played, as opposed to on radio or as opposed to when someone buys a record. It's like what, point? 0.04 cents per stream or something like that.
It depends on the platform, but yeah.
Yeah.
Um, there was a passing sentence that you skipped over in the Boing Boing piece that really made something pop into my head for a
Oh,
second.
okay.
I want to go back to
Yeah.
it.
Do it.
The guy Tom Dunn, he was talking about TikTok somewhere in
Uh,
here.
oh, that's why I skipped it.
Here it is. And here it is. That's when the music industry was throwing money left and right instead of hoarding it all in the C-suite while they look for ways to exploit TikTok stars with built-in fan bases. This is the part that I think that you and I have zero knowledge of, right? Is that there are musicians who their entire careers are built off of TikTok, not off of any of these platforms or ecosystems that we're speaking of. I only became aware of this a few weeks ago. You might not even know about this. Are you familiar with David with a four in his name? David, D4ID?
No, I am not.
You should be, because he was all over the national news about a month ago because he's been accused of murdering a 14-year-old girl
Jesus
and
Christ.
stuffing her dismembered body in the trunk of a car. And I had no idea who this guy was.
Okay, I'm familiar with that story because I
Yeah.
do read the news, but
Yeah.
also I didn't feel any obligation to learn more about him.
Yeah, me either. But I was shocked because I was like, I've never heard of this guy. I don't know who is this person, right? And he is, him and people like him are are the musicians who are the major label stars nowadays. That
Sure.
they mentioned in passing on one of the news clips that I saw about this that the place that he was staying at in Los Angeles, he was renting for $23,000 a month. And I was like, whoa, like you make that money on TikTok. I had no idea.
Well, don't leave me hanging. I mean, how does that make you feel?
It doesn't make me feel one way or the other outside of like, hope if he murdered this woman, hopefully justice is served. But um, I guess what it makes me think is th all of this stuff has just shifted.
Yeah.
And it's similar to how Dunn ends his thing, right? Like someone makes a thing, someone fronts the money to turn it into a product, and then rich people get richer. And they're doing it now on TikTok instead of selling CDs at Strawberries, right? Um, or another thing like that you may know more about than I do because you have kids, but like what's the guy, Mr. Beast?
Oh
Like,
God. Yeah.
he has this YouTube empire, but my understanding is actually that's not where he makes his money. He makes his money off of selling junk food that's branded with his identity.
So all of this to say, and I'm not making a joke or trying to like land the end of the episode, but all of this
Yeah.
to say is that like the issue we're having here is the scale of consumerism in America and the ability of companies to extract value when they intertwine themselves with the infrastructure that delivers compelling or compulsive content of any kind. Because like whatever music David makes
Yeah.
and or made, let's hope he's done, or whatever videos Mr. Beast makes of, people trying to protect safes full of money from bazooka attack, or those guys in Australia that try to pop weather balloons with arrows and handfuls of screws in a giant sports arena. They're just making stuff that people are going to keep watching. And the money is being sort of stripped through that system and out,
Yeah,
and you never see it.
right. I think I would argue that any creator, in quotes, whether it's Mr. Beast or Shellac or David Byrne or you and I making podcasts, are being exploited by the middlemen still. Um, Mr. Beast, in the sense that, I mean, who knows what the economics are? Maybe we do a super context on Mr. Beast.
Oh
Um,
no.
but like that, who knows how much YouTube is pulling in monetization off of the content he creates.
Yeah. Well, one has to assume that he knows about it and has done his best to get a piece of that pie also.
I mean, obviously, right? Like again, like I don't know a ton about his situation, but he's clearly building an empire, right?
So
He's
let's
figured out how to work around that
so let's
system.
bring it back to Albini. What was the original purpose of the problem with music? Was to warn people who were going to enter into the music industry to pay attention where the money went, to pay attention to what
Yeah,
was being spent.
to watch out
He
for grifters.
he didn't believe for a moment that you could operate within it without being exploited or without having that
Yeah.
money suddenly become, well, now you owe the record company this this amount of money that you'll never recoup in royalties, so you're just caught. But ultimately, the idea is watch out if you make something, especially entertainment, there are people who want to make money off of that. And if you're not careful, you won't be able to keep doing what you want to do because you'll be put in a position of being exploited until that is all you can be is exploited.
I think that is true, but I might even take it a step further, and this just may be where I'm coming from lately. And you and I referenced both our issues with uh, uh, contractors and rental car companies recently. I think that we are a nation of grifters. And I think that it's gotten exponentially worse in the last 10 years than it ever was before because the people who would exploit others feel like they have free license to do so and they have no shame. Um, it's funny actually. While we were sitting here recording the episode, my phone was ringing. I get at least 5 calls a day that are from um, scammers, and it's always the same scam. And it's an AI bot that reads a script. It's the same script every time, but the bot changes its name and its voice. So every time I listen to the voicemail, it's a different person, but they're saying the same thing. And it's essentially like, oh, we saw that you applied for a loan, and if you call us and you give us your information, you're going to get $50,000 from us or whatever, right? And I have to spend time every day to clear my voicemail inbox of these scams. And I think this is, at least from my perspective, this is kind of what life has become in the enshittification era, whether it is Spotify or it's your podcast company or it's the car company that you rent from or it's the guys who come to fix the pipes under your house. Like everybody's got a fucking grift. Everyone's looking to exploit you. It's not just artists anymore. I don't know. Obviously, like I'm at a point where I'm ranting about this stuff now, but I don't know what the solution is, right? Like to this, well, I guess first thing, like, am I wrong in what I'm saying here?
Yes, you're wrong, but you're totally right that that's how it feels.
Okay.
I would say it has ever been thus. And if there's something that we can look at through all of this, remember that what we found in the trail from the problem with music is that the details were different, but there was always the discussion of trying to figure out how to place yourself in symbiosis or in opposition to business and corporate interests in order to make a living but stay sane, in order to participate but not be exploited, in
Yeah.
order to have a life that is enjoyable and lovable without allowing someone to make money off of your need to be loved or to enjoy things. And we were raised in a time when certain kinds of grift and certain kinds of exploitation, people knew how to handle them and they were telling us, and we were kind of ready for it and we were sort of prepared. And now we have gotten old and tired, Chris. And the exploitation and the grift is different, and we weren't prepared for it. And we kind of thought that we'd be protected from it by now.
Hmm.
But now it's just starting to wear us down. And there's young people who are like, yeah, no, I get it. And I'm not going to be taken down by it. And in 30 years, they're going to be in the same position. And then they'll be doing a podcast for their sort of prime membership obligation requirement that they have because they've been Amazon members for so long that it's actually part of their citizenship requirements. And they'll be talking about how it's a lot of trouble and I just don't understand it. I used to understand how things worked because I was a part of Amazon, but now there's this global snatch and I don't even know how, and there'll be young people who are et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it's that bad, Chris, but relax. It's going to be okay.
But it's no worse than it always has been, is what you're saying.
Resist the amount that you must, but don't despair.
You've been listening to Super Context, a podcast autopsy of media.
How it's made and how it informs our everyday culture.
Our theme music is Human Factor by Mile Marker.
And you're listening to Drive Fast by 3 Chain Links.
All show notes are available at patreon.com/supercontext.
And you can email the show at supercontextpodcast@gmail.com.
I'm available on Blue Sky as @Christian Sager.
And I am not available. I have a scorched earth policy on social media. 2 N's, 2 T's.